Zach, 1367.
Mr. Chair and members, Senate Bill 1367 prohibits the National Guard of Arizona from being released into active duty unless the U.S. Congress has passed an official declaration of war or taken another appropriate official constitutional action. The bill requires the governor to take all necessary actions necessary to comply with the requirements of this act. And finally, the bill defines active duty and declaration of war. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Zach? Senator.
Mr. Chair, members, this is the Defend the Guard bill, which has been passed in, I think, 30 other states in the United States. And this says that our National Guard, Air Guard, National Guard, both, could not be deployed overseas without the United States Congress having made a declaration of war. This does not preclude our, say, for example, Air National Guard to go shoot down a balloon that might be wafting over the country. This does not preclude our National Guard from responding to a natural disaster in the United States, say, for example, a flood. So I'm proud to bring this forward, and we do have subject matter experts to testify on it.
Any questions? Mr. Vice Chair.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we have two people signed up to speak, Scott Blake and then Jacob Imnett.
We also have, if I may.
All right. What bill are we on here?
We are on 1367.
1367. My mistake.
If we have anybody who's not been able to get in.
Excuse me, Madam Chair.
I'm sorry, Mr.
Thank you.
Chair. May I ask you to make an announcement?
I don't know. What is that?
Sorry. Paper slips are available.
Yes, paper slips are available for anybody that wishes to speak.
Okay, on Senate Bill 1369, we have Ryan Boyd, 1367. I'll get it. My apologies. Okay. Alan Skilcorn.
Chairman, Senators, Alan Skilcorn, Fountain Hills Councilman, testifying on behalf of myself. And I think this is an excellent bill. We need to consider some of the things we've seen in the news going on right now. We're seeing a national emergency in another state with derailment. We're seeing some of the same incidents happening on roads here. I think it's very important to have our people that respond to emergencies here in state. We need to have our heroes here to work for us, but also we need to have our heroes here working along the border. We do not need them to be doing other things, other projects, and other effectively being usurped by the federal government. I think it's very appropriate for these troops not to be called up for anything other than a declaration of war. But really, we need them for our emergencies here with our own borders, and we need to protect our infrastructure, our water supply, and our own border here. And I just ask for an aye vote on this, and I'm open to any questions.
Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, next we have Travis Schulte, then Brandon Slayton, then Nathan Madden, and then Ross Trumbull. So Travis Schulte is next.
Good afternoon, Chairman. For the record, Travis Schulte, Legislative Liaison for the Department of Emergency and Military Affairs. Neutral on the bill, but would like to begin saying we're not opposed to the argument or the intent of the bill. However, we do have concerns about the tactics. So, Mr. Chairman, Senator Rogers, to correct your earlier statement, this bill has been introduced in 30 states. It's never been passed in any of those other states. And it actually would interfere with the ability to shoot down a Chinese spy balloon that would enter our airspace. The Arizona Air National Guard has the Air Sovereignty Mission, and this bill specifically states that it cannot, the Arizona National Guard cannot be released into a conflict, an armed conflict, without explicit authorization from Congress. And so that is we cannot flip over into an emergency interdiction without an authorization from Congress per line 7 of the bill. And so that would impact the bill right there. Sorry, I had something else going on, or a whole other train of thought, but overall, the Army and the Air resources the National Guard based on what the state, not what the state needs or wants, but on what the combat requirements are for the Army and the Air National Guard. So the Army and Air National Guard will not resource a guardsman or a unit that is not deployable. There are at least 3 separate statutes in U.S. Code Title 32 that allows the Army and Air Force to revoke federal recognition and resources from a state unit or individual if they are not deployable. Yeah, sorry. If we can't support the mission, the mission and the resourcing goes away, speaking like to that air sovereignty mission. If we can't deploy and support to defend Arizona airspace or over the southwestern United States, that mission will get reallocated to another
You can
Another
raise,
unit.
you can raise it up. too.
Sorry.
No, I mean, you could raise the table.
That way?
No, the whole table
Oh.
can go up.
Modern
Now it's
technology.
right in my face. There we go. So for at least the past decade, the Army and the Air Force have been pushing a narrative in DoD and Congress that the National Guard in general is not accessible when needed. This narrative is patently false and usually grows louder during periods of federal budget concerns. But it is used to justify the continued consolidation of the nation's military forces under federal control, contrary to the intent of the founding fathers to spread the gunpowder around by enshrining the National Guard into the United States Constitution. The Association of the United States Army recently published an anonymous paper that basically said that quiet part out loud by advocating that all combat units should be transferred from the Army National Guard into the active component, and that the Army National Guard should be reduced to a constabulary force that focused only on state response. That article even stated that the amount of money spent on a National Guard brigade combat team would be better spent in the active component, without the honesty of clarifying that a National Guard unit only cost 1/3 as much as an active duty component, active duty unit. So the Air Force spins a very similar narrative on recapitalization of aircraft. The bill will provide an
10
excuse,
seconds.
an excuse to fall through on that narrative that they've been laying to transfer the combat capability of the National Guard to the federal government under the guise of inaccessibility, and leave the state with a hollowed out constable force. And I'll wrap it up there, but I have available for questions.
Any questions? Yes, Senator Borelli.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Schulte, could you expound more on that? I mean, I understand the intent of this bill. We don't want our troops deployed unless Congress acts. And, I mean, you're a Marine, and I was in the Marine Corps, and we got sent overseas for under different war powers without a declaration of war. And we want to make sure our guardsmen are not put in that position where we need to keep these folks here. Mr. Chairman, can you expound on how that would restrict the Guard from doing?
Schulte.
Yes, Mr. Chairman Gowan, Senator Borelli. Yes, well, basically, to go back, the federal government, the Army and the Air Force, they provide all the resourcing for the National Guard. They will not resource a unit that they can't reach down to in the state and deploy when they need to. And it's usually, they give a year out to put on the patch chart. But the National Guard is fully integrated into the U.S. Armed Forces, and by taking the Guard out, that provides an excuse for them to transfer that force structure, those units, from the National Guard into another federal component, or maybe another state. But what it does is it would remove that unit from Arizona and out from under the state's control. And we know that would happen because it's happening now in the Space Force. So the Space Force has been stood up, but it does not have a reserve component. It draws its authority from, same as the Air Force, same as the Army, under the Constitution's power to raise an army. The founders wanted to raise an army from the National Guard. And so they are not established. The U.S. Senate and the administration are opposed to establishing a National Guard for the Space Force. However, the Air National Guard used to support the space mission for 30 years. So they could easily flip over. There's no cost, they just need a new name patch. But what the administration is doing is allowing the Air Guardsmen to lose their mission and their resourcing as their space mission dies out and they don't have a follow-on mission. So the Space Force is driving on, but that mission is consolidated now under the federal government, and the states have lost their connection to it. Does that help, sir?
Any other questions for Mr. Schulte?
Mr.
Senator.
Schulte, Mr. Chairman, you're neutral,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Schulte.
and
Mr. Chairman.
that's because,
Chairman Gowan, Senator Rogers, we're neutral. We're here to provide, inform and educate on what the impacts of the bill would be.
Mr. Chair,
Senator.
Mr. Schulte, but the Space Force, is that really an analogy? Because there is no guard component of the Space Force.
Chairman
Mr.
Gowan,
Schulte.
Senator Rogers, it is a good analogy because that is the model that the Army and the Air Force are actually looking at on, honestly, how do we get out of the National Guard business? The National Guard is tough to get to, intentionally. That's how the Founding Fathers set it up. They spread the gunpowder around across the Union. They would love to consolidate those powers and authorities under federal control.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Senator.
Mr. Schulte, so how does this bill deviate from that?
Mr. Schulte.
Chairman Gowan, Senator Rogers, it would prevent the Army from reaching out and, say, grabbing our infantry unit for deployment. The Army would use that as justification to remove the resourcing from that unit and move it to the active component, the reserve component, wherever. They may leave the people there, but everything that drives the people, like, you know, the equipment, the money for drill, all that would be taken away to stand it up elsewhere. And that's when the state would lose its ability to really influence national defense decisions, because we're no longer at the table when deployments do come.
Senator.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Schulte, but then if we hearken back to our roots and the origin of the thought process that we draw from the Guard, spreading the gunpowder, as it were, across the nation, then say we proceed with this methodology and pass this bill, say, for example, in every state. If we did, wouldn't it be counterproductive for the active duty forces to then do that to all of its Guard units, which they originally philosophically sprang from and would like to spring from?
Mr. Schulte.
Chairman Gowan, Senator Rogers, I don't think it would be anti-philosophical for the Army to do that. I think the Army would take advantage of it because they've indicated they would, and they've signaled as much as that article in the Association for the United States Army publication, in which they would advocate for that in-state. What I would actually offer up in, as a counterpoint to get to a point where Congress has to reclaim its war powers is advocate that the Army actually and the Air Force push their force structure back into the National Guard. So draw down the standing Army that we currently have and put those units back into the states, almost where they belong. By putting them more in the National Guard and under state control, it takes more effort to get to them. There's more voices, there's more eyes on what's going on, and then I think that would get the attention of Congress that they need to be more deliberate in their war powers and their use of the war powers.
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
one
ma'am.
last question. Mr. Schulte, then if we, the National Guard, the states, strengthen their resolve to keep their own Guard under their control, state control more, wouldn't that force the federal government to then respect that, honor that, and know that they have to rely on them and treat them right financially?
Mr. Schulte.
Chairman Gowan, Senator Rogers, I guess I can't necessarily speak to that. Like, they could take that. If we're the only state that does it, then I think we'd be made an example of.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Schulte.
Thank you.
Yes, Senator Browley.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Schulte, so you're telling me if this thing passes, the federal government, armed forces, would absorb our air and ground guard
Mr. Schulte.
under an active duty component, and we would lose that control? Is that what you're saying?
Chairman Gowan, yes, Senator Burley, I would offer, yes, that is going to be the excuse they will use to start picking apart the Arizona National Guard unit by unit when we fail to meet the deployment requirements that they set out. And like we currently have 1,000 soldiers that are deploying over this calendar year. It's a big year for our deployments. Some are in combat areas, some are not. So, but those that are in a combat area, as defined, like, Kuwait is still a designated combat zone. Jordan is still a designated combat zone. Those are areas where U.S. forces dwell at frequently when they're overseas. That deployment would be basically not allowed under this bill. So we cannot meet that deployment requirement. So the Army would then have the option of not to resource us to revoke our federal recognition of that unit because we cannot meet the deployment.
All right. Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Schulte. Mr. Vice Chair.
Next, we have Brandon Slayton, then Nathan Madden, then Ross Trumbull. Please state your name for the record and speak directly into the microphone, adjust it as needed, and you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, members, my name is Brandon Slayton. I am the chairman of the Maricopa County Libertarian Party. Libertarians are passionate anti-war activists. I think this bill actually brings a deeper philosophical question to our country, and that is, the rule of law. The Constitution, which is the current supreme law of the land, says that only Congress can declare war, not a president. Doesn't matter what party he's from. Doesn't matter if he's a blue or a red. The reason why that's important is because Congress represents the people. And any time that we send our men and women to war or to conflict, we have to make sure that we're doing it for the right reasons. If you look at our recent history, we haven't done well. We haven't followed the law. We haven't had important debate on what conflict from this country means and what the impact is. 22 veterans died every day by suicide. That number might be even more now. Who do we blame? There's no accountability. When you take an oath of office, you're supposed to defend and support the Constitution. And I think that if we pass this bill, it will send a message to Washington that it's time for them to do their job too. Congress is supposed to write the laws. They don't even write it, they outsource it. They don't read it before they vote on it. And they also don't declare war. They don't even have the debate. And so there's a lot of unanswered questions of how this will impact policy and things in the future, or maybe funding to the state. But the philosophical question of what is the rule of law and what is an important, what is the right reason to send our men and women there? I think that this is a very, very important bill, and I really do urge you to vote yes on this.
Any questions? Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Nathan Madden, and then Ross Trumbull. State your name for the record, please.
Nathan Madden, Buckeye, Arizona. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm here to speak in favor of the bill. I have in my hand the Constitution of the United States, Article 1, Section 8. There are provisions in here that give Congress the power to declare war and provide for organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia of the several states. So to a previous commenter's point, there is no reason for Congress to start taking money out of our National Guard. They have a constitutional responsibility to do so. It's right here, black and white. Now, we've not had an officially declared war since World War II. There should be no reason why our own state troops are in any way in combat zones, which are illegally declared. They should be here, helping and protecting our country, our state. That's all.
Thank you, members. Any questions for Nathan? Thank you very much, Nathan. Finally, we have Ross Trumbull. Please state your name for the record. You'll have 2 minutes. You can adjust the platform to your height if you like.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I don't see Chairman Gowan, but thank you, Chairman, members of the committee, for hearing this bill. This is a very important issue to me. I have watched our country over 20 years, more than 20 years, really, go to, I've lost count how many wars that we have gone to undeclared. I might not have enough fingers on my hands. I want to talk about what I think that the National Guard was meant for, and it's a big topic in this state, and it speaks to another issue that's being thrown at us, and it's called invasions. The Constitution gives the authority to the president to enforce federal law, repel an invasion, put down an insurrection. A Chinese spy balloon flying over this country, I would consider to be an invasion. This is exactly what the National Guard is for. So to assert that somehow this bill, which is very simple, which states that we need Congress to declare a war before we send our troops overseas into combat, I don't see how one has anything to do with the other. A Chinese spy balloon is an invasion. There's another invasion happening that I think the National Guard could be more involved in, and that's the invasion at the southern border. We have a previous governor, previous attorney general who have said in no uncertain terms that there is an invasion happening at our southern border. But I read the news and I saw our National Guard deployed overseas to Eastern Europe, our Arizona National Guard, to defend their borders. I think Defend the Guard, the legislation, is essential because I'm here today to ask you, please follow the Constitution. You have all sworn an oath to it, and some of you have sworn several. I think that if we continue to fight these undeclared wars, which we have never won a single undeclared war, we will continue to be $30 trillion in debt. Our National Guardsmen, who are brave civilians who enter into that contract to protect our domestic population, they'll continue to come home in boxes. It's time to bring our troops home. It's time for Congress to take back their power to declare war. But until such time as they do that, the states are authorized to exercise their 10th Amendment powers and say that we will not send our National Guard to undeclared wars overseas. And with that, I'll take questions.
Any questions? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, that's the end of our speakers, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Vice, move the bill.
I move Senate Bill 1367 with a due pass recommendation.
All right, members, you've heard that motion. Madam Secretary.
Mr. Chairman, may I explain my vote?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've heard some great testimony today. I loved how he quoted the Constitution, and he's right. Also, the Second Amendment, we forgot to add that in there. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. We need to keep our guard, but what concerns me is how we know how the federal government likes to consolidate and grab more power away from the states. I do not want to, and of course, on those southern border missions, if we would have put somebody down there, the federal government had threatened to federalize our guard and take them off the line. So there's too much federal overreach already, but I'm concerned about the funding, that if we go forward with this, that the federal government's going to grab too much power. But I think we might be able to find some kind of language in here to protect us. I think there's room for that protection. There's always room for amendments. That's why we write it in paper. It's not written in stone, so we can amend it. And I agree. I'm tired of seeing our boys go overseas, and women go overseas. And I'm tired of seeing them coming home in a flag-draped coffin. I have a son in the Marine Corps. He retires in 2 years. And I pray to God that he does not have to make another casualty assistance call like I did. He did 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. He retires in 2 years. He's not going any further. 20, that's it. He's done. He did 3 years in embassy duty. 1.5 years of that was in Haiti. He couldn't even leave. He could only leave the compound where the embassy was at, across the street to his quarters to sleep. Several times during that 1.5 years, he had to step over a dead body in the street. He couldn't even, because the place is just a shambles. He's burnt out. I know Marines that have made 7, 9 deployments since they've been in the service. And those are not easy deployments. They're not easy on the families. But we need to protect our Guard. There's got to be room in here so we can fine-tune this so we can protect. I vote aye.
No. No.
No.
Mr. Chair, may I explain my
Yes.
vote? It's been an honor to carry this bill. I'm a fifth-generation career military officer. Our son was the 6th, also a Marine. He thought the Air Force was too soft, but anyway.
Clean sheets and ice cream. Yeah.
He was a reservist. My brother, who's a federal judge, was a reservist, a guardsman, both. It's time we, the states, take back our plenary power, both as a legislature and as one that has its own National Guard. And I share my colleague, Senator Borelli's concerns that the federal overreach has run amok and reached too far and wide. But we have to start somewhere to take our rightful power back as states in so many areas. And this is where we do it with our National Guard. And with that, I vote an enthusiastic aye.
Keep the comments down. Let's keep some
Mr.
order.
Chairman, quick explanation.
Yes, sir.
My oldest brother was in the Navy. My second brother was in the Air Force. I am attempting to serve my country here, and I vote aye.
Aye. All right, members, 4 ayes, 3 nays, 0 not voting. You've given Senate Bill 1367 due pass recommendation.
Thank you.